Welcome to today's episode of the Digital Diaries. Today's guest is someone who embodies what modern entrepreneurship looks like when curiosity meets relentless execution. Tyler Hochman is founder, builder, and innovator based in Los Angeles. He's the founder of CEO FORE Enterprise and the co-founder and CEO of SafeStop, and the mind behind multiple ventures spanning technology, safety, and digital experiences. Before launching these companies, he studied management science and engineering at Stanford University and gained experience in finance roles with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. And what makes Tyler's story so compelling, it's not the resume, it's the pattern for identifying problems early, building solutions quickly, and scaling ideas that sit at the intersection of technology and real world impact. Recognized by Forbes as one of the 30 under 30, highlighting a generation of founders reshaping industries. There's so much to unpack today, and we're delighted to welcome Tyler to the Digital Diaries.
Thank you for having me, Peter. That was a very kind introduction.
Well, it's all you, Tyler, but we'll jump straight in. Let's go back to the very beginning. What sparked your interest in building companies?
Yeah, I was a junior. Well, even going way back, I actually started, I guess, entrepreneurship when I was very young in middle and high school. I got into and I never really talk about this, but I got into gems and I kind of became like a version of a gemologist and started my own functionally jewelry business where I was diagnosing and cutting raw stones, and then, forming them either loosely or, or polished into pieces or just selling them, post cut. And that was kind of my first foray into, starting a business, I guess, and almost like a lemonade stand business. But my version of it was with Tiger's Eye and Jade and some cool and different gems. And then when I got into college, Stanford definitely fosters that creative and entrepreneurial mindset. So my junior year of college, I started my first business, which at the time our goal was to better enable people to tell their parents and grandparents life stories. And so we identified the problem, which is that everyone always asks mom and pa and grandpa, where's our family from? What do we, what's our culture? But they don't necessarily know the right questions to ask.
Yeah.
And so we kind of created a Mad Lib style format that allowed people to record, that asked the questions over audio, allowed you to record your answers, and then we sold it back to them as a book. That company, I didn't continue on with the company. The company continued on without me, but it's done very well. But that was my first foray into entrepreneurship.
I absolutely love it. And, I think kids who do these things in elementary and high school, that kind of gives them core lessons on, things that apply to all businesses like cash flow. Well, how do I get money to buy? Like you have to source gems, right? And then learn all the skills that go with it, and everything sat on Tyler's shoulders. It's really interesting to hear that, your education in Stanford helped it. But what was the moment that, kind of in your late early 20s that you said, yeah, I'd rather be a founder than a traditional career path and just working in the corporate world?
Yeah, I worked for, like you said, a couple different financial institutions, and the thing that really got me was dead time. It was time I was spent ironically not working and quite frankly incredibly bored. To the point where like I would just go into the bathroom and like sit there for because I had nothing to do. I had very little to do and I didn't want people to see that I was on my phone. So I would just try to find ways to pass the time. And that's kind of when I decided like I would rather, it's a common saying, right? Work 100 hours for myself than 40 hours for someone else. Mostly for me, it was just because I actually need something to do. Like I cannot just sit there and have nothing to do. And I think, corporate roles are great when they can be optimized and when they can, when the role is necessary and you can really fill your day. I think you can get the same amount of satisfaction, as being an entrepreneur. The problem is that especially as you start out, it takes a very long time to get to the place where you're autonomous and you can actually do that. And I'm sure the MDs, the partners, the vice presidents at these firms, like they can fill their day as much as they want, but the analyst, the associate, the junior vice president, like they're not getting those choices. And as a result of that, I was functionally bored.
Yeah. And, that's an interesting point because there is a reactive nature in the corporate world of like, what someone at the top says needs to be done. And then what your role is in that and how much you can step in. And you're also navigating corporate politics, whereas you kind of just decided to sidestep that and focus on output and what you can do. Which brings me to kind of my next question. As a serial founder, it's great to see you recognize the Forbes under 30. But how did you decide which ideas are worth going after when you probably had loads, as many people do?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think if you think of ideas like a funnel, your top of funnel, there should be a lot of them, right? Like you don't actually want to pursue anything without having, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 other things to say no to. So if it's that funnel, your top of funnel, I actually think you almost, to your point, you don't want to pursue anything until you have considered enough alternatives. Then once, you feel like you have enough options on the table, and my big thing was always options. I think people it comes from defensiveness, maybe it comes from ego, maybe it comes from a kind of don't want to fail. I don't know what the mentality is, but they become very defensive over kind of having a line and sticking to it. And I think that's the silliest thing in the world, right? Like in my best case scenario, there are 1,000 options, and a business should and could and will pivot to accommodate those options at any time, because anything can be better than what you are thinking right now. And even in the businesses where they have like game changing ideas and everyone told them no, you would be surprised at the amount of options that they considered and different paths they took while everyone said no, obviously, and it was in a more linear fashion. They always consider those options. So my answer is that I kind of went with the ideas that I believe to be the most defensible while allowing for anyone to pick apart any part of it and encouraging that. And then if someone picked apart it well enough, I say that's a bad idea. You made a very good point, but not being so defensive about letting people say your idea is bad.
It's really interesting because you're reminding me of, interestingly enough, an anecdote from the Kennedy presidency. So, without getting too much into history, the Bay of Pigs was a disaster for Kennedy. But then the Cuban Missile Crisis, he got it a bit better. But what actually happened was he divided his team into two and said, come up with two strategies. But then when they regrouped, the opposite teams had to present the other team's strategies and then go back. And they did this cycle 3 times. What happened was is that nobody was overly invested in one idea and everyone cared about the collective goal. And so they came up with the best possible solution. Well, history may dispute that, but in theory, that's how the idea works. And I think what you're saying there is that you have to have the confidence in yourself and security for me to say, Tyler, listen, I see a gap here and this isn't working. And it's not me attacking you. It's me trying to help you and work with you and collaborate. I think there is an emotional intelligence piece there that you're kind of getting at that's really important in those situations.
I completely agree. And I do think it takes the best, like growing up, I always loved to debate. And I do think you'll find that in most founders, like they can kind of play devil's advocate. They can take any position just for the sake of having a, sophisticated discourse. And so I think that's definitely been impactful in my ability to pursue ideas without feeling like, I'm being attacked personally if someone doesn't like them.
Yeah, and that's where good ideas grow from. So a lot of people do have these ideas, but even fewer take the time to execute. How is your process working for you that you go, right, I have an idea, I've funneled it, now I need to take it from concept to launch. What does that look like?
Yeah, in concept to launch, I actually think ideas are a dime a dozen. And everything I'm saying is, for some, I think a lot of people can accomplish it, right? Like it's actually pretty, assuming you're open-minded, you're willing to hear, diverse of opinions, like you can have your ideas be challenged. Now the question is, to your point, how do you actually put them in action? And I think execution is 90% of the work. And it's it's I always like to think that the more boring something is, the more impactful it will be down the line. And so everything from setting up, taking hours upon hours to set up your CRM so it actually works and it can actually deliver you value, right? Taking hours upon hours to design your architecture in such a way where it's truly scalable. Like ultimately, and it's funny, when I applied to college, I applied to 20 something schools because my parents were like, it's all a crapshoot. Like it's a probability game and you're just maximizing your potential of being able to go to college. And I think entrepreneurship is actually very similar, which is when you start a business, most likely it will not succeed. That's a fact.
Yeah.
But that being said, you should be able to do everything in your power to maximize your potential of success. And that can be, that's across every element and every facet of the business. And so that's what I think execution looks like at the beginning of starting any business.
I really think that's interesting. And just taking the time to do things right. Like I have for the last couple of years, I've really enhanced it. I have a very simple spreadsheet that manages my exercise patterns, what I do exercise wise. But I chose not to pay for an app because I'm like, I don't need to. I want to tailor my way of how I do. I use ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude to come up with new things and workout plans. But ultimately, if you look at it, it's just 4 tabs in a Google Sheet, one dashboard, and a list of exercises that I've done and a list of exercise routines. That's it. But that's all that I need. And that solves the problem. And I often hear founders talk about it. If it doesn't solve a problem, it's not that interesting. And think of all the products, even around one's home, that are solving a problem, but are really, really important, really impactful. And you would frankly miss in your daily life if you didn't have them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think too, there are everyone always says like, are you solving a problem with a new idea? Are you solving it by, changing the way you interpret it? Are you solving it by, changing coming at like to what degree are you solving it? And then how does that translate into a successful business? And that's why I'm so focused on execution because you've seen copycat ideas, right? Like look at Uber and Lyft. It's literally the same idea,
Yeah.
but the TAM was big enough and they both solved the problem. And the big thing they did, which no one else could do at the time, was just execute. Like they actually built an app that worked at scale. And then they got the two sides of the marketplace and they were able to make it work. Like, but conceptually it was the exact same idea.
Yeah, and that's a really important point about execution because, and I'm going to link this back a little bit to rejection because even if you all agree as a group of founders, the first people you go to then is funding. Naturally, every venture capitalist is going to shoot down your idea. Now, I mean, shoot down, they're going to challenge you immensely about it because they want to make an investment. And so when you pick like say Uber and Lyft, one thing, they overcame all of that and just said, here is the problem that we are trying to solve. And right up to today, we have Uber, the company operating in Ireland, but we don't have Uber, the service. And what I mean by that is you can't have a taxi service without a public service vehicle license. So we need laws changed to allow ride sharing to work in the sense that Uber and Lyft actually should operate. And it's a problem that's really missed. And as someone who's traveled and used it, I really feel it. So I think that's very, very interesting. Now we've talked about failure, mistake in early ventures. You said it's nearly a guaranteed. What changed fundamentally how you would build a company today versus back in college or doing the gem business in high school?
Oh, I mean, it's radically different. I mean, and it's the buzzword everyone's saying, but like AI has enabled businesses and the formation of businesses, the execution of businesses to a degree that it is shocking. And we are able now. I fully believe that, and we're seeing them now. I mean, there are 10-person billion-dollar businesses because the effectiveness, especially on the engineering side, of being able to augment like most of the engineering effort, and this is coming from an engineer, is incredible. Like engineers built a tool that out of everything that AI is able to do very well, automating engineering is the thing it is able to do best. And so if you are not using AI for engineering, you are falling very far behind.
Well, I couldn't agree more on that. And I would even say in any field, you're falling behind. So when you say it's like exponentially different, I know that AI works, but how are you using AI? Is it for idea generation? Is it for process when you have the idea? Is it for go-to-market strategy? Tell me how that fits in.
Yeah, I mean, I like to kind of quantify it because I think people, if you're not in, and I'll start with engineering, but then I can go across any field.
Sure.
If you're not in the field, it's interesting. So imagine an engineer used to only be able to write 5,000 successful lines of code in a month, right? And let's say that was a engineer that was a good engineer. So let's call them a 50 percenter. They operate right in the middle of the pack, 5,000. Your best engineer, your guy you're paying your top amount of money, they're hitting 10,000 lines of code or 12,000 lines of code. Now what AI is enabled is your middle of the packer can do 30,000 lines of code or 40,000. I mean, we are talking 6 to 10x increases for the middle of the pack people. Now, what's interesting about it is actually has narrowed the gap between the middle and the top and even the bottom and the top because it's made the volume so much larger.
Hmm.
So I do think you're seeing this really interesting period right now where it's raised the floor so high that top level talent is retaining a lot of it commands a lot of salary, but middle of the road talent doesn't. I digress, but this is just something I find very fascinating. But ultimately my point is that it's 6 to 10 to 20x the productivity of engineering just on the amount of lines of code that can be written. So that's engineering, right? Then you go to sales. Sales has, lead generation, sales has lead follow through, sales has conversion rates. All of those things are benefited from AI, from generating the leads themselves, in terms of lead generation on a cold basis is a big data problem, right? It's taking a massive data set and then centering the filter parameters so you can get qualified leads that are actually good for your business. And AI, that is a great use case of AI. Then it's in terms of actually converting those leads. I think it's good. It's not amazing at this point yet, but it can like actually provide you how to speak to the potential leads, right? It can give you talking points. It can say what it thinks it's most effective. I think it's best at solving big data problems. I don't think this one is a big data problem. I think this one's actually involves a little bit more interpersonal skills, but it's definitely helpful. And so that's just the sales process. And I can kind of go through each one, but I think every aspect of the business needs to be touched by AI.
I completely agree. And even the way you're saying this, yeah, I'm getting the sense touched by AI correctly. Like, let's know what we're actually trying to ask AI to do because the failure rates are so high at the moment. But I think a lot of companies and founders or operators are just going, yeah, we need AI to do what and how is it going to help? And I think we're so excited on the return on investment and the productivity gains and the transformation that we're not looking at where it's actually going to go. Like, take insurance, for example. There's so much AI can do for insurance right there. Like it's shocking. How does this experience change your decision making then as well? Because, in terms of hiring, say, for example, are you going to hire the top end engineer or are you going to say, well, actually a mid-tier guy is probably perfect?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely means you can operate with a much leaner workforce. So you're hiring less people, and you saw, you're seeing significant layoffs happening right now and from profitable businesses, right? Which is so interesting. There's a well-known one that just happened where, the founder came out and said the business is growing well, which typically doesn't coincide with the layoff, but these people are literally extraneous. So yeah, so from a headcount perspective, it's impacting it significantly. And then from I would say your top tier people, and you can see the Meta, the Google, they'll pay them tens of millions, I mean, $100 million because the ability to interact with AI at the highest echelon is still something that requires, a person. But I think now, to your point, if you're operating now between a 40 and an 80%er, yeah, I may hire the 40%er because honestly, the difference in volume and quality of code is marginal as a result of AI.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like, are you really getting extra value for the investment in the top performer? So you're founder of SafeStop, who tackle real world issues around traffic stops and safety. What inspired you to go down to that solution?
It was a cool solution because we developed it at the time where there was a lot of tension between communities and police officers in the United States. And we were trying to figure out nonpartisan ways to use technology, without taking a side just to make, the overall interaction better. And that's what we thought SafeStop did. I mean, ultimately, it made both people who were being pulled over and people who were doing the pulling over feel very comfortable, or more comfortable, I should say. Our biggest problem with SafeStop was actually virality. I mean, we had the issue with it and the way it works differently in each different country and even different states, but in California, as an example, you have to partner with every single local sheriff station. Every city has its own police department. And so, unless we had those departments partnered with us, we couldn't offer our service in that area because you need the police or the sheriffs to have bought into it. And so, we just had too many people. We're trying to we're still trying to figure out the business because we had too many people from areas that we weren't partnered with downloading and trying to use the service and then being like, it doesn't work. And we're like, well, we're not even in your city yet or anywhere near your city. So that was an interesting problem.
It is because I mean it shows a genuine need and a desire for SafeStop, and so those challenges then like how are you kind of bridging that gap to not only get into new cities but say take California as example, get coverage across California, like how are you approaching that?
It's a good. I mean, SafeStop. We're kind of we're answering this question actively right now. So I don't know. I have a perfect answer, but what it did has taught me is the impact of that both being underprepared and overprepared. For scale is a problem. And in this case, you always think like, oh, my biggest problem is going to be virality. And ironically, in this instance, we had virality, and that actually became our biggest problem. And so we are trying to figure that out, and kind of leads me into what FORE does in terms of setting the right architecture in place to develop scalable tools on top of it. That's why I think FORE is so impactful, because using SafeStop as the example, our infrastructure in both the technology but also in the business model, needs significant work for the type of scale and virality that we got.
And just listeners, in case you weren't clear, FORE is one of Tyler's other companies, which he's the founder on. So tell us about FORE and who you work with and what problems you solve there.
So FORE is a AI solutions architecture firm. And what that means is we essentially are very good at working in the boring back end of data. And we kind of, my media people always tell me that it's super boring. So I'm gonna try to make it sound less boring. We essentially take data in from we help businesses take data in from their data sources. We then structure and format and store that data so that it can be used for really cool AI tools. And the reason we started doing that is because, and we actually build very cool AI tools as well. But the reason that we swam downstream a little bit is because, to our earlier discussion, ironically, most people, you haven't set up the right foundation to make AI work for you. And so AI is amazing and it's super powerful, but if your foundation isn't set up correctly, it can actually be detrimental to your business because it's giving you the wrong insights or no insights at all. And so that's what we do, is we help set up the foundation necessary to enable all these cool tools.
I absolutely love that, and I'm a good bit older than yourself, Tyler, and I remember when in Europe the GDPR regulation was brought in. Obviously, that meant businesses had to contract the size of their databases, and many people were like, "Oh no, this is terrible. We're going to lose 50,000 records," and it's like, they could be 50,000 records of junk. What are they actually doing for you? And that was often the case. Like people were really shocked when they were forced to do this exercise. And I think AI is kind of keeping people sharp on it about what actually matters. And I think it's actually driving better services and products delivery, because companies then have to constantly go, who's my ICP? What's my market actually look like? At a more regular and more granular cadence. And I'm willing to bet your customers are very happy when you do that and you get through that process.
Yeah, it's definitely it is not the sexiest process by any means, but it is, once we actually get through it, they're definitely pleased. We also have AI tools, and those, we have a very interesting real estate product. We have a number of interesting products we sell on top of that. Those are when you can see the most value, but most of the work we do is work you can't see. But for Fortune 500 businesses, for sports teams, for fashion houses, for very, kind of impactful businesses, it's the necessary work.
Yeah, I think it is. And, if you ever look at a sports team training, some of the best coaches in the world will say, watching our training is boring. And it's kind of a thing of boring is cool, but that's where the basics happen. Like, I'll take like American football or basketball or something like that. One of the most important pieces of play in either of those games is me throwing the ball from me to you, which is the most fundamental boring thing. Like that's not a cool bit of the game, right? That's not the bit we're excited for, but it is the part that gives the flow and structure of the team to get to the exciting part. And I think that's where what you're saying about FORE in terms of cleaning the data and that process really comes in. So A lot of your ventures are technology with a social or practical impact. What was that the intentionality you set out, or how did these ideas come in to develop the businesses as they are?
It's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, because of my background, I've always been interested in technology, just from the engineering perspective. So they have all had a tech focus. I also think it's, for me at least, became the easiest way to scale a business. I think, and you can see why the market pays for it. Like tech scales the fastest, and so that's kind of why I leaned into it. But that being said, there's definitely nothing wrong with, more product driven or hard product driven businesses. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on right now in everything that from a hardware perspective supports AI. I think is fascinating. I think space has become very interesting from a hardware perspective, not even a technology perspective. So there's a lot of adjacent spaces that I actually think are very cool. But yeah, for me, it was always like, what can scale the quickest?
Oh, and then with that, how do you balance kind of profit and purpose as a founder, given the businesses that you have?
Yeah, to me, they go hand in hand. Purpose drives profit, not for the sake of profit, but because it's good purpose. And I've always enjoyed that. I think, and the other thing that I think which is interesting with a startup, is, and like I was saying earlier, most likely you're not going to succeed. Like just statistically, it's going to be very difficult. But if you have purpose, at the end of the day, at least you have purpose. That's kind of how I always looked at it. Like, I'm probably not going to, this probably will not work, but at least I have purpose. And, if I had to take people's money and ultimately, I wasn't able to return that capital in the way that I wanted to, at the very least, we all committed to a purpose. And so that's always been kind of a North Star for me.
I love that because at least, that purpose means your work had meaning, it was fulfilling, and it was naturally pushing into the work life balance. And I often think when people say, I'm burnt out at work, it's because it's not connected to their purpose as people. So they naturally get tired and frustrated. Whereas, it's very clear you're working from a place of passion and purpose all of the time.
Yeah, no, it's super true. And it's funny, I actually see it. I've got a couple friends who started CPG brands, and we saw this intersection where you had a lot of like celebrities coming into the CPG space, sponsoring all these different drinks and joining the founding teams and whatnot. And kind of tangential, but I think it's interesting. That the only time it worked when you kind of throw a celebrity on top of a CPG brand is when it actually aligns with the mission of the brand. And so you had all these like wellness influencers and wellness celebrities coming in and starting alcohol brands. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like this person doesn't even drink. There's no reason that they need to have a tequila. And
Yeah.
people recognize that. Like, it's not like you can just, if your brand does not coincide with the purpose of the business, people, and it's not authentic that way, people can actually see that and are relatively pretty discerning. And so to your point, I think you have to not only have purpose, but it actually has to coincide with what you believe in and what you stand for. And when you get that marriage right, you're maximizing your potential for success.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, you've had a lot of success, and so much so you've been recognized by Forbes on the 30 under 30 list. How has that recognition affected your journey?
Marginally, I don't think, yeah, I think it was, a nice point of recognition, but by no means did it pause really anything.
So, no pressure for work or greater opportunities. You just kept on trucking the way Tyler always does.
I mean, I would say, the opportunities are definitely not as a result of the recognition. They're, the result of doing decent work. But yeah, I mean, that's not, I would say a lot of founders, if recognition is what you're after, starting a business is, you know, uh, well, I will take a step back. There are founders who have a chip on their shoulder, and their ultimate desire is to be kind of recognized by the world for the success, for the impact of what they've created. But I don't think it's coming from 30 under 30. I think it's coming from sitting at the top of a world leader summit. So I would say if recognition is your driver, you've got extremely lofty goals, or recognition isn't your primary driver, in which case, your purpose, you're more purpose driven in a different way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because the people that you're talking about that are so highly recognized are kind of mid 50s, even into their 60s, who've been 35, 40-year careers where we just, they're like household names as a result of that. You've talked a lot about founder being one. As with your experience, what are the three skills every modern founder needs today?
I think the first one, which is just it's obvious in my mind, but ironically, I see a lot of people not able to do it, is you need really thick skin. Like you need to be able to take criticism and not let it derail you, because there are a lot of very smart people who are significantly smarter than I am, but if you have a very hard time taking criticism, and having someone be, even ironically, even if the person is wrong, the very fact that they don't like your idea offends them, which to me is crazy, because I'm like, don't like my idea, I'm gonna make you prove why you don't think it's a good idea, but I don't mind that you don't like it. So I'd say a thick skin is a particularly impactful one. The next one I would probably say is you need purpose to kind of what we were talking about, like whether, and the purpose doesn't have to be grandiose, it doesn't have to be changing the world. Like I'll give you a great one, which is, and I've talked about this before, but one of the things that drives me nuts is that when you open water, when you open it for the first time, and this is a product, when you open it for the first time, you get a click and it tells you that the water was previously closed, but then when you close it every time after that, there's no click, and so you never know if you've closed the water all the way, you never know. And I'm a germaphobe, so I want to know my water was closed all the way. And so I'm like, why wouldn't anyone just create kind of a little latch system where once put it over, then it relatches and then it gives you the click again. But like, to me, that's a purpose, and it comes from my germophobia, ironically, but it's something I'm very passionate about and very purpose driven. So I'd say, like, it doesn't have to be grandiose, it doesn't have to be world changing, but have something like you really care about, and then that's going to be your driving purpose.
I think there's additional margin in that. I think people will pay slightly more for that on their water bottles.
I completely agree. And Arrow had tried it with a latch system that came like this,
Yeah.
because you like reclipped it, and that's the wrong way to do it. It's a screw latch system, and it needs it. Yeah, I completely agree. I think you could patent that.
The sound is the key.
Yes,
It's that certainty to go, yes, this is a fresh water bottle. Nobody has tampered with this.
that's exactly right.
Great minds think alike. So third and final skill you think that modern founders need.
My third and final one is that you need to be obsessive. I think, everything is working against you as a founder. And so the only thing that you have at the end of the day is an obsessive compulsion for success. And success can look different to everyone. It doesn't necessarily mean monetary or financial success. It doesn't necessarily mean your brand is viewed by hundreds. Maybe it just means that you've impacted one life that day. As an example, you've impacted one person, or you've impacted one water bottle, but you're obsessive about achieving whatever success looks like to you.
I think that's great. And it's kind of nearly starting with the end in mind, because at least then you know naturally where your exit strategy will be. Because often once these businesses are scaling, the person who maybe gets it from, off the ground to say 100 million ARR is not necessarily the same person that can take it from 100 million to 100 billion. There might be several changes along the way. You need to know what your exit strategy is in that point, and to take a step back and go, now is the time to pass the reins over to Tyler or whoever the case may be, and allow it to move on.
Yeah.
But of those skills, can they be learned? And if so, which is the easiest and which is the hardest?
Yeah, I definitely think entrepreneurship can be taught. I would say to a degree. I think, could you learn how to build a business, learn those skills, and then go and build a, v- you know, 50, 60, $100 million business, which is a beautiful business. Absolutely. Now, can you go and create an Apple or a Facebook or, a Tesla, and learn how to do that? No, no shot. Like, that is, yeah, I believe that there's a element of, you know, intrinsic to a person that cannot be taught, that creates those style of businesses. But can you create several very successful businesses? 100% with these skills. And I would say the easiest two to grasp, thick, I mean, all three are kind of, ironically, they're not technical, right? They're more like interpersonal. Like, thick skin is just put yourself out there, allow yourself to be debated against, allow yourself to receive criticism. It's not, even if it takes every day you ask one person to disagree with you, that's an easy way to start to learn that skill. Purpose is I think this one can actually take a little bit more time because you have to be very, reflective and internal and think like what gets you ticking, what actually gives you passion and aggravates you. Or to me, most of the time, ironically, my passion comes from things that aggravate me. So I just look at like what makes me the most mad and I'm like, okay, that's where I'm going to start.
Entrepreneurship is solving a problem. You're finding what bothers you and going with it.
That's exactly right. And then obsessiveness, I think that would have all three is probably because some people just are obsessive and some people aren't. But I think when you get the first two, when you get a thick skin, and especially when you find purpose, obsessiveness will follow. And so I would probably leave that one. I think it's kind of hard, it's hard to learn how to be obsessive, but I think when you really find something that you care about, you just naturally become obsessive.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I love what you're saying about the business sizes of the Facebooks, the Apples, and the Teslas. Like that's one thing, and they're a group of people. But for perspective, and I just want to give population here. The population in Ireland is 6.6 million people, which is the size of some cities in the States are bigger, right? But what's really interesting, I watched an episode of Undercover Boss, a few of them, and you'll often see these companies that nobody's ever heard of that are turning over a few hundred million, operating in 3 to 5 states. And the CEO is the founder who originally built like, say, one restaurant and suddenly scaled it out. And it's like, this guy has made it in every conceivable way. Never underestimate the importance of doing something simple really well, and that can be scaled. I think that's where you're saying entrepreneurship can be learned. Anyone can do that if they really sit down and think about it. And I love to hear your support for other entrepreneurs in that way. It's fantastic.
Exactly.
So, one last question there before we let you go, Tyler. For the next generation, the kid who is starting their gem business, what's the advice you would give to them to build their business for the future?
My first thing would be don't overspend on a gem cutter. That was a big issue I had, and it turns out that the diamond tips necessary to maintain the accuracy of the machine were more expensive than the machine itself. So that would be if you were going in the gem world. But what I would say is that I think right now people are, and this goes back to kind of my whole thesis, in this talk, which is that people are afraid to be disagreed with. And the number one thing you can do right now is to put yourself out there. And again, you see every good founder, and I think this is attributable to everyone, put themselves out there, and then we're told vehemently that they are dumb, that their idea is dumb, that without a doubt. So if you can develop the ability to put yourself out there and learn how to have a thick enough skin to be disagreed with at a young age, you are setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, well, look, I just like to thank every girl I asked out in my teenage years because they really helped me develop that thick skin. Look, this has been a truly fascinating conversation, Tyler. You yourself are an inspiration, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. What has stood out the most for me is the mindset behind your ventures, and I can see it's alive and well and it's not going anywhere. So I imagine in 30 years, you'll still be creating new businesses, tackling new problems that actually matter. And your journey shows today that it isn't just about building companies, it's about solutions and purpose and how we interact with the world. Thank you so much for joining the Digital Diaries today.
Thank you for having me.